Welcome. In the previous session, concept of learning have been discussed, but in this session, we shall be discussing the process involved in learning and remembering. When you will have studied this study section 10, you should be able to describe the nature of learning, explain motivation in learning. You should be able to discuss the process of remembering, and lastly, you should be able to discuss retention of memory and failure in recall. The nature of learning. Psychologists have found out in their study using animals as control. They discovered that most animals, when placed in a situation that requires certain amount of learning in problematic situation, such animals behave in a characteristic way. For an instance, when cat is put in a cage, which requires the manipulation of certain lever to allow it to escape from the cage and get to the place outside the gate. Initially, the cat will behave in an apparently random, purposely way. It will try to force itself out through the cage to reach the food. It may begin to run around the cage, jumping occasionally in an attempt to force a way out. After several attempts, its behavior will result in pressing the correct lever, apparently by accident, and the cat will escape. When faced with similar situation at another time, the cat will behave in the same way, but there will be a decrease in the amount of random behavior before it touches the correct lever and thus solves the problem. Each time this experience is repeated, there will be a gradual reduction of errors and a shorter space of time elapsing before the animal gives the correct response to solve the problem. Therefore, it can be concluded that the animal learns by carrying out a number of trials during which errors are gradually modified and corrected. This type of learning is called trial and error learning. Obviously, human learning does not proceed in similar random manner. The solving of a problem in human learning is usually accompanied by realization of the way in which the solution is achieved. When learning involves a sudden awareness of the method of solution, it is referred to as insightful learning, to distinguish it from the blinder manipulation of trial and error learning. In clear terms, insightful learning also means that once the principle of solving the problem is achieved, the subject has sufficient understanding of this principle to be able to apply it to other learning situations of the same type. A careful look at the learning process demonstrates that insight is usually achieved only after a great deal of trial and error. When learning involves a sudden awareness of the method of solution, it is referred to as insightful learning. A third form of learning is represented by the process of conditioning. The influence of conditioning on learning process is first demonstrated by Russian psychologist Pavlov. A response is said to be conditioned when it is aroused by some stimulus other than the one which originally aroused it. For example, an animal such as dog salivates at the sight of food. The secretion of saliva is the natural response, and the food is the unconditioned stimulus. If, however, a bell is rung on each occasion on which food is presented, the animal will learn to produce the salivary response towards the new stimulus of the bell, even when the food is not presented. The bell has now become the conditioning stimulus, and the salivary response may be said to have been conditioned. This form of conditioning, in which unconditioned responses are linked with a new range of stimuli, is often classified classical conditioning, to distinguish it from operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is a much more active form of learning in which certain responses are strengthened by reinforcement. Reinforcement needs not always take a positive form. Parental disapproval, conveyed by word or direct action, conditions the child to continue inhibit certain action because they have now become associated with displeasure. In conditioned learning of this type, the individual is entirely unaware that his behavior is being influenced. Motivation in learning. Motivation is sometimes that energized, direct, and sustained behavior. It gets students moving, points them in a particular direction, and keep them going. In a normal situation, people are involved in purposeful learning. Real learning occurs in the presence of effective incentive. Incentive can be financial, a form of competition, and it can even be a pride of succeeding in one's chosen career. The incentive may include these and many other aspects, but it must be present in some forms. Directly connected with motivation in the learning situation is the importance of identification. Identification, in fact, plays a primary role in all learning, in that what we are learning depends much more upon the personality of the teacher as well as the material to be learned. The principle could be broadly stated on the effects that learning may be facilitated or inhibited according to the type of relationship existing between the teacher and the learner. The effect of identification on learning is, of course, seen most clearly in the increase in the range of the young child activity, which occurs through identification and with the parents. How motivation affects learning and behavior. Motivation has several effects on students' learning and behavior. Motivation directs behavior towards particular goals. Socio-cognitive theories propose that individuals set goals for themselves and direct their behavior accordingly. Motivation determines the specific goals towards which learners strive. Motivation leads to increased effort and energy. Motivation increases the amount of effort and energy that learners expend in activities directly related to their needs and goals. It determines whether they pursue a task enthusiastically and wholeheartedly or apathetically and lackadaisically. Motivation increases initiation of and persistence in activities. Learners are more likely to begin a task they actually want to do. They are also more likely to continue working at it until they have completed it, even if they are occasionally interrupted or frustrated in the process. Motivation affects cognitive process. Motivation affects what learners pay attention to and how effectively they process it. For instance, motivated learners often make a concerted effort to truly understand classroom material, to learn it meaningfully and consider how they might use it in their own lives. Motivation determines which consequences are reinforcing and punishing. The more learners are motivated to achieve academic success, the more they will be proud of and the more they will be proud of that achievement. The more learners want to be accepted and respected by peers, the more they will value membership in the in-group and be distressed by the ridicule of classmates. Motivation often enhances performance. Because of the other effects just identified: goal-directed behavior, effort and energy, initiation and persistence, cognitive processing, and the impact of consequences. Motivation often leads to improved performance. The process of remembering. Although asking learners to retrieve certain information from memory will facilitate later recall of this information, it will also paradoxically lead to selective forgetting of related information that they were not asked to recall. Anderson, Jock and Jock 2000 label this effect retrieval-induced forgetting. Many apparent forms memory deficits are actually learning deficiency, for we cannot hope to recall something which has been inadequately learned. In turn, adequate learning is partially dependent upon early sequence of attention and perception. Therefore, attention is an active selective process whereby the individual chooses from the mass of competing stimuli in his environment the particular stimuli which fits in with his personal needs. Perception, on the other hand, is process of assimilating stimuli in a meaningful and organized way. Remembering is the final stage in the learning process by which we are able to make use of the stored up results of previous learning. Like most of our human attributes, we tend to take memory very much for granted. Although without this capacity, we will be less than human. If we were not able to store our previously learned knowledge and subsequently recall it when needed, everything presented to us will require to be learned anew. The two phases theory of memory. It has been shown that there may be two separate stages in memory process. Neurological work indicates that the temporal lobes of the brain are vitally important for remembering. Hence, injury to this aspect of the brain has a profound effect on the memory. As the information is coming in, it will be selectively filtered, as you are seeing on the slide. This information will first go to the short-term memory, and over a long period of time, it will proceed to a long-term memory, which can easily be recalled over a period of time. Memory process. We have already looked at the different stages of memory formation, from perception to sensory memory to short-term memory to long-term memory in the subsection in the slide above. This slide, however, looks at the overall processes involved in a memory process. Memory is the ability to encode, store and recall information. The three main processes involved in a memory recalling involves one, encoding. Encoding is the crucial first step to creating a new memory. It allows the perceived item and interest to be converted into constructs that can be stored within the brain and then recalled later from short-term or long-term memory. Encoding is a biological event beginning with perception through the senses. This process of laying down a memory begins with attention, in which a memorable event causes neurons to fire more frequently, making the experience more intense and increasing the likelihood that the event is encoded as a memory. Emotion tends to increase attention, and the emotional element of an event is processed on an unconscious pathway in the brain, leading to the amygdala. Only then are the actual sensations derived from an event process. Consolidation is the process of stabilizing a memory trace after the initial acquisition. It may perhaps be thought of part of the process of encoding or of storage, or it may be considered as a memory process in its own right. It is usually considered to consist of two specific processes: synaptic consolidation, which occurs within the first few hours after learning or encoding. 3. Storage is the more or less passive process of the retaining information in the brain, whether in the sensory memory, the short-term memory, or the more permanent long-term memory, recall or retrieval of memory. This refers to the subsequent reassessing of events or information from the past which have been previously encoded and stored in the brain. Failure in recall, that is forgetting. We usually become interested in the memory process at the point where it breaks down or operates in a faulty fashion. Oftentimes, many cases of forgetting are in actual fact due to inadequate learning, not necessarily due to disturbance in memory processes. All things being equal, ease of recall will depend on the degree to which the material has been originally learned. Most adults could still rattle off multiplication tables, poems, and other materials of their early school days. Forgetting is simply said to be inability to recall a process or an event when needed. Theory of forgetting. There are so many theories of forgetting. We have trace decay theory of forgetting. Trace decay theory of forgetting focuses on time and the limited duration of short-term memory. Then we have displacement from short-term memory. This seeks to explain forgetting in short-term memory and suggests it's due to a lack of availability. Displacement theory provides a very simple explanation of forgetting. Interference theory. There are two ways in which interference can cause forgetting. You will read more of it in the course material. We have proactive interference and retroactive interference. Then we have a retrieval failure theory. Retrieval failure theory is where the information is in long-term memory but it cannot be reaccessed. Some of these retrieval cues are external or context in the environment, for example, smell, place, where then we have an internal state inside of us. For example, physical, emotional, mood, and a drum. Thank you for listening. See you in the next slides.